All right, so one of the primary points that the 2A brought up was first being the saving of the innocent. It turns out that the death penalty does save the innocent. James Christensen, 2019. It is something necessary to use. It is sometimes used necessary to use capital punishment. Capital punishment is likely to deter more than other punishments because people fear death more than anything else. A study conducted by Ehrlich analyzed the use of the death penalty. The study showed that for each person executed under the death penalty, 7 lives were spared because others were successfully deterred from killing someone or committing an act of violence. The use of the death penalty as a tool of deterrence is effective, especially in states that have high murder rates. The death penalty is necessary to provide a tool of deterrence. Um, it also discourages uh, life from parole, as brought up by the AF. Life um, life without parole is not as happy-go-lucky as it seems. Life without parole, death penalty abolitions lead to life without parole. Uh, Death penalty abolition leads to this leads to less chance of appeal wrongful sentences and the person just dying in prison. Uh, Kleinstuber, 16. Life without parole is semantically disguised sentences of death. Is is a sentence of death. Death penalty abolitionists embrace life without parole as a palatable alternative to the death penalty, as well as intentions as the recent repeal report efforts have been. They have been accompanied by a number of unintended consequences that may be impeding the quest for a more humane justice system. Most of the recent death penalty repeals have not only failed to alleviate many of the problems that abolitionists have traditionally viewed as plaguing the death penalty, they have actually encouraged the increased proliferation of a penalty that could be considered worse than death. Inmates serving LWOP are not afforded the same heightened due process protections afforded to those on death row by the Supreme Court's jurisprudence of death. As such, they have less access to the courts and less ability to challenge the accuracy or legality of their convictions, and are therefore in a worse position than those who have been sentenced to death. Abolitionists have failed to challenge the very philosophical justifications that have sustained the death penalty, thus contributing to the same get tough approach that supports the excessive punitiveness of the American criminal justice system as a whole. This move has dramatically increased the number of prisoners condemned to die in prison. This overall, it goes over, and I'm going to move on. Um, so, in this sense, um, with the death penalty, it encourages, it is much more, not only, I'm losing my mind, onto the point of international human rights. The central problem with human rights laws is that from human rights are too ambiguous to be useful. Posner, 2014. The central problem with human rights law is that it is wholly ambiguous. The ambiguity which allows governments to rationalize almost anything they do. The sheer quantity and variety of rights can provide no guidance to governments. Protecting one human right might prevent a government from protecting another. And this extends further into how international law gets violated all the time and that the system is broken from Worth, 2017. Many norms of international law, especially international human rights laws, are widely violated. International human rights law has become more expansive and looser so as to bring more rights norms into the ambit of international law, despite widespread non-compliance with these norms. Today, international law includes a broad range of human rights norms which are routinely violated, from the UN reporting requirements to gross violations of human dignity. Widespread violations of some legal norms may make it harder to enforce others. A baseline reputation of noncompliance among states generally harms interstate cooperation because it means that states will have to do more in treaty agreements to generate trustworthy commitments. Onto the subject involving global warming is brought up by 2A. Climate change is real, but not likely to do much harm. Ridley, 14. The IPC commissioned four different models of what might happen to the world, given a certain assumption about the atmosphere's sensitivity to carbon dioxide. 3 of the models show a moderate, slow, and mild warming. It is a world that is very, very implausible. The world is assumed in the scenario to be burning 10 times as much coal as today, producing 50% of its primary energy from coal, compared with about 30% today. These are highly unlikely assumptions, with abundant natural gas, the price of solar plummeting, nuclear power experiencing revival, methane hydrate gas being discovered on the seabed, energy efficient rocketing, and population growth continuing to fall. Many different studies converge on the conclusion that it is much lower than assumed by the IPCC in these models. Temperatures have not risen at all now for the last 17 years. So overall, the assumption that the U.S. Involving in international law, especially in terms of global warming and such, along with forcing others to follow these laws, is not applicable with the removal of the death penalty. And yeah, I've kind of lost it. So on to the subject of soft power brought up by 2A. A lot of this being that, with soft power, there's little to add on to, given that, our soft power as a nation has been deteriorated as of late. The election of Trump shattered U.S. soft power, makes it almost impossible to reverse from Tharber 2016. One major casualty of Trump's victory in the bruising U.S. presidential election is America's soft power around the world. It is a development that will be difficult, perhaps even impossible to reverse, especially for Trump. America's culture and ideals set the bar for others. Trump's ascent to power has shattered that image, those ideals, and it has exposed tendencies the world never used to associate with the U.S.: xenophobia, misogyny, selfishness, etc. The story of America told in this election has deeply diminished the soft power the U.S. evokes. Fear trumped hope. The American dream became the world's nightmare, and the demons released, echoing in widespread reports of racist taunts by Trump supporters, will taint everyone else's perception. Plus, in this situation, so given that things are not exactly representative of the United States, removing the death penalty will not add to anything sheer fire, as we are already not viewed in very high light. History proves American leadership solves no great world problems. White, 2016. The American electorate no longer appreciates the American role in the world that policymakers have long taken for granted. And what if the electorate is right? The record is not very impressive. So far this century, America has failed to achieve most of the key national security objectives it has set. Here's a list. Prevent North Korea getting nuclear weapons, prevent Iran getting nuclear weapons, and contain its growing influence in the Middle East, transform Iraq and Afghanistan into stable states, contain and eventually crush jihadist extremism, harness the Arab Spring.
Sorry to cut you off, but that's time.
Okay, sorry.
Don't apologize, you're okay.
Okay, I'm open to cross-examination.
I'll start the cross-examination timer, so.
Thank you.
Could you elaborate on capital punishment?
All right, hold on. So with capital punishment, given that you are setting someone doomed to die, giving the more tools are provided for those on death row compared to those who are put in prison for life, and there's a higher chance, given that change in legislature, given change, those on death row are given more opportunity, and that those who are just doomed to die are given less chance to prove their innocence.
Okay.
I do not have any questions for cross-ex.
Would you like to stop cross-ex there?
Sure.
All right. If the 1NR is ready to go, I will just start the timer when you start speaking. Keep in mind you only have 5 minutes for the speech.
Lucas, this is you.
When you just start speaking, I'll start timing. So don't worry about timing. I got it.
What am I supposed to do on this speech?
I can't really tell you that now. So you just kind of yeah, you got to give the speech. So I'm just gonna say your time begins now.
All right, I'm speaking.
And that is time. So if we can move on to the 1AR.
Jack, are you recording or timing?
Yes, I will be timing you, so just start speaking and I will be ready to go.
Okay, so really quick, little roadmap. I'm going to be answering some of the arguments made by the 2NC, and then I will be moving on to further our case. So we can start. So my opponent brought up that the death penalty being sentenced to death would be better than actually serving life in prison, and that they are given more chances. I disagree with that, because if you are sentenced to life in prison, you still have the ability for your lawyers and representatives to look for more evidence that proves your innocence, that would therefore let you be released and ultimately let you move on and have a normal life. So being sentenced to death, there's no coming back from that. Once you're dead, and that is ultimately the end of your life. And that's not only a very cruel and unusual punishment, it definitely violates the Eighth Amendment. So now moving on to our case. The liberal international order solves great power conflict. Baldwin 18, the international order formed after World War II, provides important benefits to the U.S. as well as other countries. The U.S., NATO, and World Trade Organization, the European Union, and other post-war institutions all help provide economic stability and international security, contributing to the longest period in the modern history without war between major U.S. leaderships helped to create this system. The U.S. leadership has long been critical for its success. Institutions are much harder to build up than they are to destroy. Almost nobody benefits from a descent into the chaos of a world without effective institutions that encourage and organize cooperations. U.S. soft power is crucial to the maintenance of liberal international order. Hoiberg 18. Historically, the U.S. used its soft power to strengthen its moral appeal abroad. In recent years, America's soft power has won. Statistics depict a blow to America's global prestige and increasing positive perception of the authoritarian states. Over the last years, China has made a great strides in strengthening its soft power capabilities. President Trump's America First foreign policy is straining America's global alliance structure and enabling bad behavior from authoritarian leaders. His strategy risks forwarding America's moral authority and post-war comment as a chief promoter of human rights. If the U.S. wishes to remain the bedrock of the liberal international order, by it ensures sustained existence of this order, it must recommit itself to strengthening its soft power capabilities. The liberal international order solves great conflict power. Baldwin 18. The international order formed after World War II provides international important benefits to the U.S. as well as other countries. The UN, NATO, World, WTO, the EU, and other post-war institutions all help provide economic stability and other international security, contributing the longest period in modern history without war between major powers. U.S. leadership helped to create this. The U.S. leadership has long been critical for its success. Institutions are much harder to build than they are to destroy. Almost nobody benefits from the decent chaos in the world without effective insinuation, according to the cooperation. U.S. soft power is crucial to banning the death penalty is necessary to U.S. leadership in the world, MIMS 2018. Even though the U.S. states claims to be the world leader in international human rights, it continues to impose a death penalty. The U.S. routinely criticizes other countries for violating international human rights. For example, it criticizes some of its closest allies in failing to prevent trafficking of women and children. Likewise, America has cautioned China to abide by international norms of behavior regarding human rights violations. The U.S. has placed pressure on countries with poor human rights records in the U.S. through America's condemnation of other countries is hypocritical because it violates the same norms through its death penalty. We are a consequence that came from the contradictory policy on human rights. For instance, the aftermath of September 11th, Europe countries acknowledged their unwillingness to extradite terrorist suspects to the U.S. if the punishment involves the death penalty. Ignoring international laws, customary norms could be created by several political, social consequences for the U.S. and this country needs to think globally. With respect to the death penalty, the U.S. should respect its responsibility to display not only political leadership in the world, but moral leadership as well. So basically, by the U.S. not abolishing the death penalty, we are weakening our bonds with other nations that are extremely important and crucial in aiding the U.S. and helping us all grow together. And ultimately, if we do not abolish the death penalty, we will break our bonds with some of our closest allies that we have had for many, many years. And that will be devastating to our country. If we lose those bonds, if we do end up going into a state where we need financial aid, we will not be able to receive it. We will not be able to not be able to receive aid in war, and ultimately the US could lose everything without its allies by not abolishing the death penalty. So for these reasons and more, I stand with the AF that the death penalty should be abolished.
The 2NR ready?
Yeah.
All right, just begin speaking and I will time. Are you ready to begin?
Uh,
You can take prep if you want.
I'll take prep.
Okay,
Prep
I will be timing you.
Prep starting now.
You have around 2 minutes of prep left. You have 1 minute of prep left. You have 30 seconds left. Ten seconds. And that is the end of prep. Your speech can begin. I'm just gonna have to start timing.
Yeah.
In 3, 2, 1.
So first off, in prospect to what was put forth by the 1AC in terms of the death penalty as something that is worse or better, that or something that is worse than life in prison, they brought up the 1AC brought up that the tools and that life would be that death is death and you can't come back from that. However, I would refute that by bringing up that extra protections are provided for those on death row, and that the tools provided have a better chance of serving and getting that person out. The extra protections afforded death penalty offenders won't trickle down to protections to those sentenced to life. Kleinstruber 16. Some may argue that this fear is unwarranted because one's attorneys and others concerned with actual innocence are freed from the pressing time constraints imposed by the pending executions. They would be free to focus on the innocence of all inmates. This does not appear to be the case. The Maryland Commission on Capital Punishment looked at this very issue and concluded that the procedural protections that are the cause of exorbitant costs of capital cases would not trickle down to life cases if the death penalty were abolished. It is very unlikely that the unique procedural protections applicable to capital cases will be held to apply in life without parole cases. Prisoners under formal sentences of death have greater access to the courts than other prisoners. The experience of Massachusetts, which has not had the death penalty since 1984, offers an excellent case in point. The imposition of life without parole in Massachusetts has never been hamstrung by the extraordinary constitutional review that death cases rightfully receive. Since New York abolished capital punishment, there has been no revision of the state's statutes to provide more specialized services in life without parole cases, nor has greater procedural protections been articulated by the courts. More, not fewer, innocent people will be condemned to die in prison. So basically what this is saying is that through means of both capital punishing what is to be put in, there is better if the person is innocent, they do have higher chance of getting out, and that they will face, they will have, the public eye shine on the situation, and they're given more of a chance to get out. As for going in, definitely with life life in prison. Life without parole is worse than the death penalty, Client Schubert 16. The prospect of serving a natural life sentence is daunting enough to lead some inmates to death row to make a drastic decision to expedite their own deaths. This view is even shared by many whose death sentences have been commuted to life. Rideau, whose death sentence was interviewed that the death penalty is mercy because LW is just another form of death. It's just that it is more excruciating than the death penalty because he's going to suffer for the rest of his life. I'm going to cut the card right there. But basically, this is saying that living out the rest, many believe that living out the rest of life in prison is a longer, and is basically saying that, even as physical death, is something that is death and you can't reverse, mental death through going through this process for so long is practically irreversible, and it serves to be worse. It's more excruciating. It's torture. Yeah, I kind of lost it there.
Okay, I'm going to cut the recording there because we don't have long enough to do the final speech. And recording ends in 3, 2, 1.